Welcome to the Sandwich Generation. This webinar and telelearning series is brought to you by Can Do Multiple Sclerosis, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, and the Multiple Sclerosis Society of Canada. My name is Laura Coyne, and I'm the Programs Manager for Can Do MS, and I will be your moderator for this evening. Can Do MS transforms lives. We deliver health and wellness education programs on exercise, nutrition, and symptom management that motivate change and help families with MS thrive. Please visit the Can Do MS website, mscando.org, to learn more about Can Do MS's online and nationwide in-person programs. Can Do MS is excited to partner with the National MS Society to bring you 16 webinars in 2017. The mission of the National MS Society is to help people affected by MS live their best lives as they stop MS in its tracks, restore what has been lost, and end MS forever. You can explore other societies' programs, services, resources, and connection opportunities at nationalmssociety.org. Our speakers this evening are Peggy Crawford and Roz Kalb. Together, they have over 55 years of experience in the field of MS care. Peggy Crawford is a health psychologist who has specialized in MS care for over 25 years and has been affiliated with the MS Center at the Cleveland Clinic, the Can Do family, and the Department of Neurology at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. Peggy has just relocated to Bath, Maine. Roz Kalb is a clinical psychologist who has specialized in MS care, support, and education for over 30 years. Roz was with the National MS Society from 2000 to 2016. She is currently working with the Society as a consultant, and she also is a senior programs consultant on the Can Do MS team. And with that, I'm now going to turn the meeting over to Roz.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our program tonight. We're pleased to be here. Now, you may be wondering how far apart Bath and West Bath are from each other, but my friend Peggy has just joined us about 8 miles away. So we're happy to be here in Maine together, and we're happy to be doing this webinar tonight. This is a topic that's actually very important to both of us, and we're pleased to be talking to you about it in this National Family Caregivers Month. And what we want to do tonight is to talk about what the stresses are for anyone who is a member of the sandwich generation. In other words, anyone who is taking care of young children as well as elderly parents, for example. And we also want to recognize how having MS oneself adds to the stresses of trying to care for oneself while caring for others you love in your family. We're going to talk about strategies to prioritize needs when you're feeling bombarded by needs on all sides, and how to establish boundaries that feel comfortable and manageable. And in order to do that, how to identify and utilize resources that you can call on so that you don't feel so alone in what you're trying to do. We're going to talk about the importance of clear and open communication with all the members of your family, the people you're trying to care for, and how to work effectively as a team so that you don't feel like you're out there all by yourself. So that's a lot of work for tonight, but we're looking forward to doing it with you. So Peggy, would you like to help us learn about the folks who've joined us for this important topic tonight?
Sure. Thank you, Roz, and hello to everybody who's joined us for this discussion tonight on a really important topic. First, we'd like to get to know some of you, a little bit about you, and so we'd like you to respond to this question. How many people do you take care of in addition to yourself? And please select one of the options, and then we're going to share the results with you. Okay, so more than half of you have told us that you're taking care of 2 to 4 other people in addition to yourself. So that's a lot of people that make you part of this sandwich generation. Okay. So let's move on to what we know about the sandwich generation. You know, this is happening more and more, that people are becoming members of the sandwich generation, in part because Americans are living so much longer. So over 2 million people in America care for children and aging parents and or their in-laws in addition to themselves. So this could be multiple children and 4 parents at least that people are taking care of. So it's not surprising that we want to talk about this tonight. Also, we know that people with MS and their support partners are not immune to this, and in fact are often members of the sandwich generation. We also know that this is a plus-minus for people, this experience. Providing support for others can affect people in lots of ways. For example, when you're helping somebody else, you have a sense of accomplishment, pride. You feel good about it. And in many cases, it allows people to develop more emotional intimacy with people in their families. And one of the things I was realizing is that as a result of grandparents living longer, in many cases, grandchildren now have ongoing relationships with grandparents that they might not have had in the past. So this is all good. On the other hand, we know that people in the sandwich generation who are providing care to others and helping others, so useful and valuable, often experience more stress. And this can be associated with fatigue, headaches, aches and pains, eating difficulties, weight issues, lots of physical symptoms. It also can be very challenging to relationships. So lots of stress is occurring between individuals who are partnered together, in addition to multiple generations. People in the sandwich generation, we know, experience higher rates of depression. And when people are depressed, everything becomes work and more difficult. Sleep problems, very common, and this can be falling asleep, staying asleep, certainly getting enough sleep. And people often are absent more frequently from activities that they would enjoy and have enjoyed in the past, and work. Roz, could you tell us a bit about how MS added to this situation, what effect that has for people?
Well, as you were talking, Peggy, I was just thinking how much is going on for people in the sandwich generation trying to manage so many different needs from so many different people. And I was thinking that, you know, that's complicated enough without adding MS into the picture. And we don't have to tell all of you out there just how much MS can add to those stresses and strains. We know that MS is a chronic and unpredictable disease. And I think the unpredictable piece here is really important, because it means for people that they don't necessarily know how they're going to feel from one day or week or month to the next. And they can't control how their own MS is going to behave any more than they can control what's going on with the others in their lives that they're trying to take care of. And most often, the other people out there can't see your MS, because there's so much of MS that's really invisible to others, particularly the fatigue or the cognitive changes that happen or other kinds of pain or discomfort that just don't show on the outside. So people may be asking a lot from you or needing a lot from you just at a point when you're feeling pretty overwhelmed yourself with symptoms of MS. And MS is an expensive disease. We certainly don't have to tell you that. And so sometimes there are financial worries associated with trying to meet your own needs as a person living with MS, as well as the needs of others in your immediate or extended family. And MS is certainly time and energy consuming. We know that things take people longer when they're struggling with MS symptoms, and that it takes more energy to accomplish the same things that used to be easier. So you can feel quite drained at the same time that you're trying to do so much for so many other people as well. So MS makes everyday activities more challenging, and sometimes people who are dealing with a lot of MS symptoms may have some self-doubts. They really may question their capacity to help all the people who need them because they're having problems with getting around easily, with feeling very fatigued and having low energy, or because changes with cognition or mood just make it harder to plan, cope, problem solve, and do all the things that you're called upon to do when you're trying to take care of yourself and others. And it's not just individuals who've been diagnosed with MS, but support partners are often feeling overwhelmed with multiple roles at home and work simply because they have a partner who has some MS-related issues or limitations, and then they may also feel that they need to be taking more time to deal with their own children or with parents and in-laws. So it's really both of you who are sandwiched in here between the needs of other people. Assistance can frequently be helpful, but for some reason, whether asking for it, offering it, or receiving it, sometimes gets really complicated. And we're going to talk more about that, but first, I'd like to ask you our second polling question. What is your greatest challenge as a member of the sandwich generation? So please select one of these 5 answers. Well, half of you, a little more than half, actually talked about not having enough time or energy. We can certainly understand that. There hardly is ever enough time or energy for any of us, and with MS thrown in, that's certainly true. And also feeling stressed and overwhelmed. Okay, so what we're hoping is that by the end of tonight's presentation, you will have some ideas about how to manage those issues and maybe feel a little less stressed and overwhelmed. And we're certainly going to spend some time talking about how to say no. So thank you for that. And now we're going to introduce you to some people that we're going to spend some time talking about. So Peggy, you want to tell us about Kelly?
Sure. Thanks, Roz. You know, Kelly, you may have a lot in common with Kelly as I talk about her and introduce you to her. Kelly's married. She has 3 children, all of whom are still at home. She has aging parents, both of whom have new health issues that are of great concern to Kelly and the family. And her husband travels for work. Sometimes he's gone late into the day, or sometimes he's actually gone for several days at a time. So he misses out on a lot of what's going on at home. Kelly has had MS for 12 years. And in recent years, she's experienced increased mobility problems, which makes getting to work more difficult. She's had some falls, which increases concern across family members and for Kelly as well. She is experiencing lots of fatigue and isn't quite sure what to do about that because it never really seems to get better. And she's also been depressed for the last couple of years. Because of her increasing symptoms, she decided to retire on disability over the past year and thought that, in fact, maybe if she wasn't working, she would have enough time and energy to take care of everything at home. And in fact, some people made that comment to her. Well, now that you're not working, Kelly, you'll be able to get everything accomplished. She's very concerned because the house is chaotic. Laundry's not getting done, stuff is everywhere. Everybody's on a different schedule. Nobody eats together. She's concerned about all the fast food the family is eating because of the cost, but especially because she's very concerned about providing her children with good, healthy nutrition, and herself as well. All of her children are involved in school and athletic activities, and she's missing out on attending those. They feel bad, she feels bad. And in general, she's just struggling to keep up with everyone's needs. Everybody has appointments, she's juggling everybody's schedules. And in addition, as I said, she's very concerned about her parents, and they live an hour away, which makes it very difficult for her to be there for them on a regular basis, go to doctor appointments with them, and just really keep up with their day-to-day lives. So the bottom line is that Kelly's feeling alone with everything going on at home, guilt-ridden, and just generally overwhelmed. And the fact that she's not working really hasn't resulted in this improved fatigue and increased energy for her to get things done. So that's another thing she feels guilty about. Roz, I think you're going to introduce us to someone who's a support partner to someone with MS.
I am. Thanks, Peggy. So now we're going to talk about Charlie. I've actually met quite a few Charlies at Can Do multiple sclerosis events. And so I really want to spend some time talking about how he feels as a support partner. He's a 49-year-old engineer. His wife has secondary progressive MS, and at this point is using a wheelchair for mobility all of the time. She's pretty independent in the use of her wheelchair, but it means that Charlie still is providing a lot of assistance to her to meet her various needs. They also have 2 teenage children living at home and 2 sets of aging parents. So that number of people that Charlie feels responsible for and that he's trying to take care of is feeling pretty high right now. As his wife's MS has progressed, he has taken on more responsibilities in the house. He was always a pretty good partner and tried to help with everything, but now he's finding that he's taking on more and more at the same time that his parents and in-laws need more help around their homes and managing things in their lives. And he's also trying to keep up with the activities of his teenage sons. He feels really lucky that his sons want him to be involved and like having him around. That's important to him, and he doesn't want to miss out on any of their events. But between work and helping his wife and trying to take care of all the things around the house, he's feeling stretched incredibly thin. And the result for Charlie is that he's pretty much taking care of everybody except himself at this point. He doesn't really have any time to do the things that he knows are good for a 49-year-old guy who's trying to stay healthy and in shape. He's not able to do the exercise activities that he used to try and do on a regular basis. He doesn't really have time to just relax and breathe and feel peaceful, or to spend time with friends, which has always been important to Charlie in his life. And for the first time, he's really finding himself feeling boxed in. He's stressed out by all of this, worried about everybody, and all the things that they need, but at the same time, he's resentful of all the pressure and feeling that he's having to do all this by himself. He's feeling lonely, like he doesn't really have the support or companionship that he needs and values. So he's gotten kind of short-fused and irritable. Doesn't really recognize himself because that's never been Charlie in the past, but he's certainly feeling short-fused now. And at his most recent physical, he found out that his blood pressure is pretty high, and the doctor commented that he'd put on some weight since his last physical. So that has not added to Charlie's good feelings. At this point, he also is dealing with quite a few financial concerns. For right now, these teenage boys are getting ready to be college bound, and that's something that he and his wife have always wanted for their kids. And he wants to make sure that they're able to get that education. But he's also very worried about what his wife's needs might be in the future, and he wants to make sure that he can take care of her, whatever those needs might be as MS progresses, and of course, whatever his parents might need. So, like Kelly, Charlie's feeling pretty overwhelmed and like he's not quite measuring up the way other people need him to. So, Peggy, you're a psychologist, so could you talk a little bit about what you think the first steps might be for Kelly and Charlie as they try to get a handle on all of the pressure that they're feeling?
Sure. You know, Kelly and Charlie remind me of a lot of people that I've seen and worked with over the years who come with this grouping of concerns and emotional distress and not feeling well physically. And often one of the places that we start is by looking at how people are actually spending their time. And people, this is an exercise that I've done with people in therapy, but people can do it on their own, or you could do it as partners within the same family, or with a good friend, where you literally write down how you spend your time. And so for some people, what I've suggested is that they actually, either on the computer or with sheets of paper, 7 sheets of paper, for 7 days of the week, write down 24 hours, and then literally write in whether they're eating, whether they're sleeping, whether they're at work, whether they're driving somebody somewhere, whether they're watching TV or going out with friends, or literally what they're doing. And it's often pretty striking because if you ask people, how do you generally spend your time, you get sort of general categories of activities. But when people literally keep a diary like this, they get much more specific information. And so then what we want to do is think about what filled your time. Who and what activities were you engaged in? And also what didn't get enough time. So I think people pretty quickly see when they look at these sheets and these records that there are things that are just not appearing on there at all. You want to look out of these 24 hours, how many hours of your day were committed to other people? And so that's pretty easy to calculate. So if the majority of your hours are going to other people, probably not much time is going to yourself. And I think for both Kelly and Charlie, that's a particular issue where they're really taking care of everybody else and not really taking very good care of themselves. Also, thinking about the activities as have-tos or want-tos. And usually when people do this, what they find is that there are many more have-tos when they count them up. That puts a lot of pressure on people, and it kind of takes the fun out of life. Also looking at how many activities supported your priorities. You know, were your priorities getting the house in order? Were your priorities, you know, connecting up with friends and family or social activities? Or were the priorities really those of other people? So you're always responding to the needs of other people. And lastly, you really want to ask yourself, did you allot adequate time to your wellness needs? And wellness is something that we've been hearing a lot about in recent years. But a lot of folks don't really have a sense of how many components there are to wellness and how many ways they have wellness needs. And Roz, I think you have some information to share with us about that.
I do. Can we go to the next slide, please? And this is our Can Do Wellness tree. We talk a lot about wellness at Can Do. We're committed to helping people achieve wellness in their lives, whether they're living with MS themselves or they are support partners. And our message here, and the real takeaway that we want you to have tonight and after any Can Do program, is that caring for yourself isn't being selfish. As you were listening to Peggy talk about whose priorities you were meeting and whether you were doing things that you enjoyed or not, I was imagining that some of you were thinking, well, that sounds good, but I really just don't have time for me. There's too much else to do. But we're here to tell you tonight that self-care has to be a priority, because you can't really take care of others unless you're taking care of yourself first. It's very much like the message we hear every time we get on an airplane when the flight attendant says, there's a shortage of oxygen in the cabin, an oxygen mask will come down, be sure to put on your own first before helping someone next to you. That is an important message in life as well, that self-care is self-sustaining. You need that care in order to be able to care for others. And wellness is a pretty complicated set of domains. It's not just taking care of your physical wellness with a healthy diet and exercise and other health behaviors like getting your yearly physicals and doing all of the things that a person your age and sex is supposed to do to check your health. It's also paying attention to your emotional well-being, your moods, and we're going to be talking about that with both Kelly and Charlie. Spiritual well-being is very important. It's what helps you feel grounded and centered, that life has meaning for you and that it's a meaning that you value and you want to nurture. Cognitive health is that you're able to engage in activities that are stimulating, interesting, that help your mind stay lively and active and keep you engaged with other people in the world around you. And work and home is that area of wellness where you are managing your activities to a level that feels comfortable to you, so that your home is what you want it to be, and your performance at work is where you want it to be. So you need to be able to focus your attention and put a reasonable amount of energy into those activities as well in order to achieve that area of wellness. And last but not least, relationships are an incredibly important part of meeting your own wellness needs. And as we'll talk about with Kelly and Charlie, the pressures in their lives right now are straining their relationships and making it difficult for them to feel supported the way they want and need to feel. So again, we want to make sure that you're finding time in that busy schedule to attend to these own needs as well as the needs of others. So do you have some more recommendations for Kelly and Charlie, Peggy?
I do, and as you were talking, Roz, what I thought about, this issue of taking care of oneself is not selfish. I think of it as an investment in oneself, because when it's a little bit like a savings account. I think most of us grew up being encouraged to put aside a little bit of money and hoping that it will grow over time and have positive results and be available. And I think self-care is something that I see in that same category, that it's really investing in yourself. When you invest in yourself, you invest in your family. So it's important for both Kelly and Charlie and everyone out there to make time for self-care, and this includes all of those domains that Roz was just talking about. And for everyone, whether you're a support person or a support partner or a person with MS, we encourage you to see a primary care provider on a regular basis just to maintain your overall health, and know that somebody objective is taking a look at you and helping to identify issues that you need to follow up on and give you ideas about how to do that. So, and for women, this is particularly important because women have regular mammograms and pap smears and this kind of thing. And it's not unusual for women with MS to say that they've gone without this care for many years. But again, this is an investment in the whole family by taking care of yourself. Obviously, we're both psychologists, so we're a bit biased about people consulting a mental health professional. But in some cases, it's just not possible to work through depression or significant anxiety without the assistance of someone who can function as your coach, really help you do a thorough assessment of mood. And again, this is something that we see both support partners and people with MS doing. As I mentioned earlier, when people have significant mood problems, be that depression or anxiety, it sort of puts a cloud over everything. Everything is more difficult to do. People don't behave in the way they want to when they're depressed, and then they feel guilty about that. And others are going to be very concerned about you as well. But a mental health professional can help you with priority setting, just discussing your concerns, and give you feedback, which you may not get within your family, or you may be leery about asking family members for feedback. It's also very helpful to consult a physical therapist. This can be for recommendations for exercise. And clearly, one of the things that Charlie's struggling with, we now know, is his blood pressure and his weight. So he's probably not getting the exercise that he usually did. And so a physical therapist can be very helpful in a very short term to give people ideas about what kind of exercise program to start, but also how to maintain motivation and think about the time of day that works best for you, how often you really need to do it. Because one of the things I've found over the years is that people overestimate what they need to do to be physically active. So people think they have to do something for an hour, and that's discouraging, so they don't start. And a physical therapist can be very helpful with that. The other thing is that a physical therapist could be very helpful to Kelly around her mobility issues and her falls. And in fact, sometimes people with MS don't realize how much energy they are exerting trying to stay upright without an assistive device and that kind of thing. So it can actually be a fatigue management strategy. Occupational therapists are terrific folks to see as well, because they don't just help people with hand function or occupational issues, but they're very, very good at helping people develop organizational strategies and having a plan for how to carry those out at home, all of which is stress reducing. You know, Roz was talking about Charlie and his concerns about finances, and actually Kelly's concerned about that too, because now that she's not working, she's not bringing in as much money to the family. And so meeting with a financial planner can be extremely helpful, and this is a resource that is available to people through the National MS Society. It's also critically important that people take some time for some fun. And when I say fun, it doesn't have to be anything extraordinary. It doesn't have to be a week of something. It can be an hour of watching something funny together, a funny movie, or having a popcorn night, or a game night, or hooking up with an old friend for coffee. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. But I think all of these are just examples of strategies that people might be able to utilize, and I think you can see how several of these would be useful to Kelly and Charlie. So Roz, do you have some more recommendations for folks?
I do, but before I move on to that, I just want to say another word about depression that you mentioned. We know that Kelly is experiencing some depression, and I mentioned when I was talking about Charlie that he's been very irritable, quick on the trigger lately, doesn't really recognize that in himself. And one of the things we know about depression, first of all, it's extremely common in MS. It is one of the most common symptoms of MS because it's related to the disease process itself as well as the challenges of the disease. But we also know from literature about caregivers that people who care for others are also at increased risk for depression. And sometimes depression doesn't look like what we picture it as looking like, you know, lots of crying or not being able to get out of bed or just feeling really, really down. Sometimes it presents as irritability, hypersensitivity, moodiness. And so, you know, I'm concerned about Charlie that part of what he's going through right now may be some depression that nobody recognizes. So I really want to echo what Peggy was saying, that a mental health professional can be extremely helpful and supportive if you're dealing with some mood changes that you don't really recognize, because life is hard enough in the sandwich generation or with MS without having to try to deal with it when you're depressed or anxious. One of the other things that I think is really important for both Kelly and Charlie is to begin to talk about how they're feeling, the problems they're trying to solve with the others around them. Sometimes people feel it's all on them. They have to do it all by themselves. There's no use talking about it. No good will come of it. But the fact is that change and adaptation begins with talking. And so both Kelly and Charlie need to start by talking with their partners about what's going on, what their needs are, both people's needs, what their concerns are, what they're trying to manage right now, so that instead of each of them trying to deal with all the problems alone, they're doing it as partners, the way they've always dealt with things in the past. So Kelly and Charlie need to start by having a conversation with their respective spouses. And then I think it's very, very helpful in situations like this to have a family meeting where the key people involved, if they are able, actually get together in a room to talk about all the needs that need to be met and how can the family best work together to ensure that everybody's taken care of as best as possible and that everybody is both getting support from the family and contributing support to the family. So that kind of family meeting can be extremely helpful. The other important aspect of communication is to be able to talk about what your own limits are. So whether this is Kelly and Charlie talking, or whether it's their partners talking, or their parents, everybody has to recognize what his or her own limits are and communicate them to others. That's how we recognize where the needs are. That's how we can begin to problem solve about how to meet those needs. So if you're in the sandwich generation and you're feeling as though everybody is wanting and needing things from you, the first step is to recognize that you cannot be all things to all people and communicate that. You communicate that you love and care about them and that you want to be as helpful as you can, but it's simply not possible to do everything for everybody. And then you decide, okay, I can't do everything for everybody, but what are the things I am willing and able to do? Where can I start? And what are the things that I want to do for each of these people who needs me? And that helps you create some boundaries. And boundaries can feel very safe and secure because you've created some limits for yourself on what you're able and willing to do for others. Once you've created some of those limits, of course, then you have to practice saying no and explaining that you have some limits and that there's some things that you can't do. But in so doing, I think it's very important at the same time that you're saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that, that you are investigating other resources that you might tap that can help meet a need that you're no longer able to meet by yourself. Next slide, please. So I think that starts with investigating the resources within your family, since you can no longer do everything or are no longer willing to do everything on your own, to investigate who else in the family might be able to help and what resources are there out there in the community that you could tap. And this can become a little bit of detective work for everybody in the family, because there are resources out there. The National MS Society can certainly help any of you identify community resources. This magic number that you see on the screen is a way to connect with an MS navigator, and the navigator you speak to will be aware of the resources in your community, wherever you live, and help you connect with those. But your extended family members are also able to do some detective work and find resources in their communities that might be helpful. And if you have kids who are teenagers, it's important to consider them a resource as well. Children who grow up in a family where a parent has a chronic illness find that when they take on some extra responsibilities or chores around the house, they develop a great sense of pride and accomplishment. They learn skills that their peers don't have, and they go off into the world as young adults much better prepared, certainly than I was when I went off into the world. So I think sometimes parents worry that they shouldn't burden their children, they shouldn't ask them to do much, they shouldn't interfere. And it is important for kids to have time to be kids. It's important for them to be able to do their schoolwork and participate in activities after school and with their friends. But that certainly doesn't mean that they can't be asked to help with things like laundry or cooking or grocery shopping once they're mobile and driving a car. When kids are involved in these kinds of activities, they can feel extremely proud of contributing to the welfare of the family. Faith-based organizations are also an excellent resource, and many people have found help and support through their church or synagogue. So as a team, you can do the detective work to find these resources. It's important to think which needs and priorities, your own and everybody else's, you can realistically address on your own, and which are going to require help from others. And that's kind of a sticky problem sometimes, because for some reason, asking for help is difficult for many of us. Peggy, do you have some tips for people on how to ask for help in ways that can be more comfortable?
I sure hope so. I think that, often people are doing a lot of talking about this issue to themselves in their own heads. And so over the years, people have said a lot of the things on this list, and this really kind of discourages them from asking for help and reaching out to other people. I think many people are just incredibly responsible human beings, and they feel like they should be able to do it all and that it is all on them. And in fact, other people are constantly asking them for assistance. Some people feel like asking for help is a sign of weakness, and that everybody will know that you're incompetent and not able to do things. But in fact, I see it as asking for help is really a sign of strength, and it is being willing to take that risk and ask that question. Sometimes people feel like others won't be willing to help. And, sometimes this thought is really based on some experience. sometimes people have asked for help and it has not been forthcoming, or people have agreed to help and then not followed through. So people often will say to me, well, there's good reason that I don't ask other people for help. Sometimes people worry that other people won't do as good a job as they do. They won't buy the right things at the grocery store. They won't clean their house in the way they really want. The laundry won't be as clean. Or sometimes people are incredibly particular about how they want things done, and other people sort of get that sense that you're dissatisfied with the way they helped, and in reality sometimes people stop offering or just say no because of the experience that they've had. So this is really the whole asking for and giving and accepting help is really a two-way street. In the case of MS, I think sometimes people really believe that no one will provide the care to their loved one as well as they do. And sometimes the loved one has literally told them that. Nobody can help me at home like you do. Nobody can transfer me as safely as you do. And that can feel very good to get that kind of positive feedback. But on the other hand, if you're saying to yourself, oh my gosh, I'm already overwhelmed, I can't do any more, it's important to listen to yourself. Some people really think that asking for help is a slippery slope to losing control. Or I've had people say, if I ask for help or accept help, then maybe my body, if I have MS, will actually go downhill and that I'll lose function. So people say all kinds of discouraging things to themselves, and as a result, they don't get the help they need, and their wellness needs go unmet, let alone the needs of other people in the household. Next slide, please. Okay, we have another polling question for you. In the past month, how many times have you asked for help? And please select one of these three options. Okay, so almost half of you have asked 1 or 2 times in the past month for help. But what's impressive here, and a third of you more than 3 times. So this seems to be people tuning in tonight are people who are at least willing to ask for help. We haven't really asked about how that went, but I think people are trying to ask for help. So it is kind of impressive to me that, 80% of you are at least asking for help. But if we think about how many times in a month people might actually need help, this is probably not all that high. But I'm glad to see that people are willing to give it a try. Next slide, please. Okay, so some tips for asking for help. I think as Roz was talking about, it's important to decide what you want and what you need help with, and to really narrow that down and be as specific as possible. And this is where priorities come in. And things that you need help with, I want you to really think about those components on that wellness tree. Some of what you want and need help with really needs to be in that area of self-care and related to your own wellness. It also is incredibly helpful if you can be very specific with your requests. For example, if Kelly's 3 children, some of them are maybe in carpools for getting to school or getting to after-school activities, it would probably be helpful to other parents if Kelly could be very specific and say, Fridays would be a great day for you to drive the kids, because by the end of the week I'm pretty pooped out with my fatigue level is pretty high. And Charlie may need to be asking other people in the family to be helping care for his wife as well. It also is useful to plan ahead and give people notice. Most people want to help. they're just not sure what you need. But if you let them know so that they can put it on their schedule, nowadays everybody's sort of ruled by their schedule, they can put it in like it's an appointment, like it's a commitment, and sometimes this isn't possible, but if you need assistance getting to an appointment, you need something done once a week, you can really let people know, and they're much more likely to be forthcoming with the help that you need. And try to keep in mind, although this is a tough one, that something done differently is better than not done. Does it really matter how the towels are folded after they're laundered? I think in some cases, you know, I've got this next recommendation, people want to help but need direction. I think in some cases, there are specific reasons that you want something done in a certain way. For example, if people help you in the kitchen but always put things up too high where it's hard for you to reach and it's adding to your fatigue, then you might want to just say to people, you know what, it's really helpful to me when you put that on a lower shelf. Then I don't have to get on the step ladder, and I feel safer about how I'm doing things in the kitchen. Most people, I think, as Roz said, just really don't understand MS and MS symptoms. So if you look okay, they think you're okay and that you're functioning okay. They don't really know. And also, you want to give people useful feedback. You can redirect people. You can say that was very helpful, but if we could do it a little bit more this way, that would be even additionally helpful to me. Or when you drove the kids last week, boy, that really helped me with my schedule because I got something else done while you were doing that for me. And a good thank you is always much appreciated. Sometimes as adults we don't think about that. But I think people like to know that the way in which they're helping you is appreciated and indeed helpful. Roz, do you have some more thoughts for our audience?
Well, I do. Thanks, Peggy. So we've talked about a lot of different things we want you to keep in mind tonight. So this is just a quick reminder of some of the key points. It's important for you to take time for the things that are meaningful to you, that are on your priority list, that give you pleasure and contribute to your feelings of self-worth. When you take time out to do those things for yourself, you actually have more energy to give to others. Keep your own oxygen tank filled and your mask ready. This is another way of saying what we said before. Taking care of yourself is not being selfish. We need to just sort of cross the word selfish out of the vocabulary. It is important to take care of yourself before you try to take care of others. And be as open to receiving as you are to giving. When people offer assistance, as Peggy's been saying, that's a valuable gift that people are offering, and you're taking it and putting it to good use is a gift you give them back in return. Don't keep your feelings bottled up inside. Like Kelly and Charlie, you need to acknowledge what you're feeling, what you're worried about, what you're thinking, and address those feelings before they spiral out of control. And be sure to ask for help when you need it. Next slide, please. So these are some resources that we would love for you to consider. In addition to tonight's webinar, Can Do MS offers a whole series of webinars on different wellness topics, as well as accompanying articles for you to read. Some of the areas are communication, the healthcare team, mood, cognition, and just about any other aspect of wellness you can think of. So please check out the Can Do Library and find those webinars and articles. And the National MS Society also has quite a few resources in addition to that MS Navigator service and the 1-800 number. One of the things that I really want to call out for all of you is the Wellness Discussion Guide that the Society put out for people with MS and their healthcare providers. This is a guidebook for people with MS to use with their healthcare providers, where they look at different areas of their wellness and set goals and work with their healthcare team to try and achieve those wellness goals. And there's also a booklet on how to hire help at home. What are the things to look for when you're hiring somebody? And a really important one for everybody is how to work on stress. So please check these out. And Peggy and I are very glad we've had this opportunity to talk with you. And now I think we're going to open it up for some questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Roz and Peggy. The first question I'd like to send to Roz. Roz, how can you make taking care of yourself a lifelong habit? The participant noted that sometimes she starts and then forgets.
I think that's it's a wonderful question, and I've forgotten what the magic numbers are, but it turns out that creating a new habit doesn't happen overnight, that we actually have to do something several times in a consistent way in order to build that habit into our lives. So I'm not sure how long this individual has tried, but I think one thing to do is, to refer to the calendar that Peggy was talking about back at the beginning of the webinar. And if some of those things that you do to take care of yourself, you actually schedule time for in your calendar on a weekly basis, and then check yourself at the end of a week, and then at the end of a month, and then maybe 6 months. But having it in your calendar is a way to remind you that this is a commitment that you've made to yourself, just like any other commitment you write in your calendar. And that with time, it becomes such a built-in part of your life that if you stop doing it, you actually miss it. So that's how I would start to build that into a habit.
I have another idea about that, and that is to make your goal or make the habit that you're trying to establish, make it public. Tell someone. And this is why people often have exercise friends, exercise buddies. I think if you team up with another person and you say to them, I want you to check in with me once a week, every other week, even every day initially, to see if I'm actually incorporating this change. Because I think there's something about knowing that we're going to be monitored. It needs to be somebody that you trust that's going to give you honest feedback. But I think making that change public in that way and getting support from the get-go is often very reinforcing.
Terrific. Thank you for that one. Peggy, we talked a lot about communication in this webinar, and I have a specific question on how to start the conversation. And the question is, how do I tell my spouse I need time apart without alienating her?
Well, that's always a tough one too. It's hard enough to start talking about pretty much anything, but particularly if you anticipate that the response is going to be negative or feel hurtful. And I think that in many cases, it's all right to just say to your partner, I want to talk with you about something that's hard for me to talk about, because I think that kind of clues them in. But the other thing is you want to make sure that you allot enough time, you do it in a quiet, private place, and that you let your partner know that, this is something that's really important to you and that you've struggled with it. And that I think to emphasize to your spouse what we've been saying tonight, and that is, if you take care of yourself, you will be a better partner for your spouse. That it's sort of like your battery's low, and so every time you want to give some energy to your spouse, it's just not there. But this is a way for you to get the juice flowing again and your battery level up. So I think that to just be in that way honest, that it's a tough conversation, but that person is very important to you, and that's why you're initiating this discussion.
I think there's one other thing that can sometimes make this kind of conversation easier, and I agree it's a tough one and you never want to hurt somebody else's feelings, but chances are the other person also has some activities that they enjoy on their own or enjoy with someone other than their spouse. And so sometimes you can make that part of the conversation as well. When you are doing whatever that activity is that you enjoy with your friend Susan, I want to take that opportunity to spend some time by myself with friends or doing this hobby that I really enjoy, because I really need some of that time for myself to kind of re-energize and regroup. So why don't we try to plan it so that while I'm doing something like that for me, you're doing something that's meaningful and helpful to you. And sometimes that makes it a little easier to hear and to plan.
Great, thank you. One of our participants noted that sometimes he gets frustrated and takes it out on his family. Do you have any suggestions for how he can control his emotions and be sensitive to his family's feelings?
I'll start with that one, but I'm sure Peggy will have suggestions as well. One of the first things that I would say is that everybody has limits, and everybody needs to set some boundaries. When you start to feel like you're at or over your limit, or you're losing control, or you're saying or doing things that you wouldn't really want the neighbors to hear because they just don't feel very nice, that's a signal. It's a red flag that you're really maxed out. And what I say to people who talk to me about that is that being maxed out doesn't make you a bad person. Being maxed out means that you're at your limit and you need to sit back and figure out how to do some of the things we've been talking about tonight. Figure out what your priorities are, where your limits are, and reach out for help with things that are beyond those limits. I would also encourage you to think about your mood. If you're feeling very, very irritable or tense or not like yourself, that's when talking to a mental health professional can be very helpful to find out what's going on, evaluate to see if you're depressed, but also just to help you strategize and problem solve how to communicate with the people around you before you blow up. Because it's much easier to connect and communicate before the blow up than after. Peggy, you have some other thoughts?
Well, yeah, as you were talking, Roz, I was thinking, picturing people are kind of like onions with lots of layers. And so I think, you know, sometimes with people, we would start with sort of talking about what actually happened in that situation where you blew up and lost it with your family. And then step back a layer and think about what happened just prior to that, and what happened prior to that, and what happened prior to that. And I think it helps people really take a look at how did this frustration sort of accumulate perhaps over a whole day or a part of a day, and really look at the fact that the core issue probably isn't frustration with the family or what happened in that moment, but it was that they came home from work frustrated or had a really stressful day. And so I think really examining what led up to that feeling. But I totally agree with Roz that sometimes people are in such a vicious cycle with their mood that they can't sort of peel away these layers on their own, and it takes somebody else asking them questions that they're really not able to ask themselves, and then kind of piecing it together like a puzzle, and also looking at alternatives. So what else can people do when they're frustrated, and having behavioral options, and then, you know, acknowledging to family too. I think taking responsibility for mood. I once saw a woman, a mom, who had 3 daughters, and she was just losing it with them all the time. And she acknowledged that she was behaving in ways that she felt so guilty about. She was calling them names, and she just didn't seem like a person who would typically do that. And she, it turned out, was depressed, And it sort of presented, as Roz was saying earlier, with this incredible frustration and short fuse and that sort of thing. And she actually shared with her family that she was having difficulty with her mood, not that they didn't know that, and her spouse as well, and told them that she was working on this, that she was talking with somebody about these issues and really trying to come up with ways to manage her mood and her behavior differently. And incredibly, after just a few sessions, her daughters wrote a letter to me saying how much they appreciated their mom coming and talking to me, because she hadn't called them any bad names in several weeks. And so I think that had she not told her family and taken responsibility, not just for her mood and behavior, but also coming up with sort of treatment for that and a real strategy for making changes, I think that can go a long way with the people around you.
Peggy, what would you suggest when you ask siblings to help and they get mad at you and complain that they don't have time themselves, and then you feel defeated and it still remains on your shoulders?
Well, boy, tough one. I think, I guess I'm assuming we're talking about adult siblings here?
I believe so.
Okay. I think that, sometimes saying to people, well, here are 3 things, 5 things, whatever, that need to get done. I need your help with one of them. Pick something off this list. And I think just acknowledging to people that I get it. I get that you feel strapped for time. So do I. So sort of empathizing with them, but saying, in spite of that, I really need your help. And I think sometimes people say no and they have sort of an attitude, and that gets us to back off. And the more we do that, the more it reinforces their behavior. So they know if they say no and they complain, you're going to go off and do it yourself. And so I think, acknowledging that, you're sounding like you're angry with me right now, but I really do need your help, and to just persist and do it in a respectful way, but knowing that over time you can extinguish that angry behavior for many people.
I really agree with what Peggy's saying, but I also know that there are families in which it just doesn't work.
Right.
And I think we have to acknowledge that. I know most people want to keep these kinds of needs and issues in the family. It feels personal. It feels like we should be able to handle all these things within the family. But sometimes when it's not possible, I think it's important to remember those other resources, that there's no shame in looking for support outside the family, through your religious community, through organizations like the National MS Society, Multiple Sclerosis Association of America, or other agencies in your community. That's a sign of strength when you reach out. So if you feel like you're just beating your head against the wall, trying to get your extended family to participate, stop beating your head against the wall. It'll feel really good. And try to reach out to some of these other resources outside the family.
I would say too that sometimes when we use the term family, many people find that it's their family of choice over a lifetime. Almost people that you choose to be your friends or like a sister kind of thing. That those are the people who are going to come forward and be helpful to you. So I think I agree with Roz that this strict sort of sense that it has to be blood relatives and everybody has to do their part, sometimes that you're just, as Roz said, beating your head against a wall there. And so I think having some flexibility and broadening your idea of who can be helpful to you is useful.
Roz, can you kind of continue on this theme and answer this question? How do I care for myself, my young child, and my elder parents with no significant other?
Well, I think that is very much in the same vein. We're used to thinking that it has to be a significant other who provides this primary support, but sometimes there simply isn't one in the traditionally defined way. But as Peggy said, you know, we have families of choice as well. We find close friends who oftentimes can become even closer or more suited to you and your needs than the people that were born in your same family, or that and so it's okay to reach out beyond and look for help. And it's not easy, and we don't want to make this sound easy. I think people who are trying to do all of this without a significant other have a tough road to hoe. But the resources are out there, and I would certainly encourage you to call that 1-800 number at the National MS Society and review with the navigator the kinds of things that you're struggling to manage, because they will have some suggestions and some resources to help you.
Great. Peggy, I want to change gears a little bit and ask you, how do I help my spouse to continue to see me as a sexual being even though they are in a caregiver mode?
You know, that's a question that comes up frequently, and one that we specifically talk about at our longer can-do programs, and the idea of how can we sort of maintain a sense of intimacy. And when we're talking intimacy, you know, we're not just talking sexual function and activity, but I think that, you know, communication is a huge part of that, and making time for each other, and making things special, and thinking outside the box. I think sometimes it's not easy to talk about, but it's pretty impressive sometimes when we have these discussions at can-do programs, and to find out how people have maintained intimacy and physical closeness, and maybe come up with some different ways of being sexual with each other. And again, it all sort of comes down to communication, talking with each other about how important that aspect of life is, and how can we make this work. I mean, we have people who, you know, have catheters and have incredible spasticity and give up sexual activity in their lives needlessly, really. But I think it often comes back to communication. So starting with, you know, that this is an important aspect of life and an important piece of the relationship that you want to maintain.
Great. And, you know, we have time for one more question, and I'm going to just go with a real resourceful question to Roz and ask, how does a person find a therapist or psychologist that truly understands MS?
Great question, and I'm glad that somebody is answering it, because it means they're thinking about getting some help and support. So the first step I would recommend, again, is calling an MS navigator. The Society maintains a list of therapists around the country who have an interest and experience in working with MS. Obviously, in an urban area, it is easier to find that kind of mental health professional. New York City, for example, there are a lot of them. But in rural areas of the country, this is more of a struggle. And it's something that the Society is working to address by trying to increase the numbers of therapists out there who are familiar with MS and have some experience. In addition to calling the Society, I would ask your own healthcare providers, the people who are taking care of MS, because frequently they know of somebody in the community who is doing counseling and has some experience with MS. And there is also a website called HelpPro, one word, HelpPro.com. And it's a site where psychotherapists can register their practices, and you can go to that website and search for somebody with some expertise in MS in your area. And you'll see a description of the therapist's practice. Usually they have a photograph of themselves. They give information about their practice, what types of therapy they do, what insurance they offer if they have special expertise in MS or chronic illness. And do keep in mind that the person doesn't have to have worked with a lot of people with MS, but somebody who, like Peggy, is an expert in health psychology, or somebody who works in chronic illness, they will be able to work with you and understand the issues that you're dealing with, even if they haven't worked with MS specifically. And that Help Pro organization, even if you don't find somebody on their website, somebody there can actually help do some extra digging. And sometimes, for example, if you live in a rural area that doesn't have a lot of mental health professionals, they will connect you with somebody who's licensed to do online therapy with you. So using FaceTime or Skype, you can actually work with a therapist and they can help connect you with somebody, even if that person is not very close to you. So don't give up, but start with those resources, and I hope you're able to find somebody to work with soon.
Great. Peggy and Roz, thank you so much for some great information this evening. We very much appreciate your time. With that, we're going to conclude tonight's webinar. And before we do, I would like to inform you of some additional resources that you might find helpful. On the Can Do MS website, as Roz mentioned earlier, mscando.org, we do have our archived webinars, our e-news, and our library articles. You can also submit questions to the Ask the Can Do team that will be answered by our team of MS experts. And as Roz mentioned earlier, the National MS Society does have a number of resources available, such as the Wellness Discussion Guide, the Hiring Help at Home, and the Taming Stress and Multiple Sclerosis. So you can find all those resources on the National MS Society website, which is nationalmssociety.org. The next presentation in our webinar and telelearning series will be on Tuesday, December 12th. It's at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and the topic is Cognition Research and Strategies. If you do have an interest in supporting our webinars with a donation, you can text to donate by dialing 970-626-6232. And I would ask you to stick around and take the survey that will pop up immediately after we close out the webinar on your computer, and please share your input. It's really helpful. Thank you guys so much for participating, and have a great evening.